Hello, my name is Rrr Mmmm, and welcome to this special series on the Wheel of Time with Stubble McShave. The Wheel of Time is one of the most important fantasy series ever written, incorporating a variety of cultural influences and customs. It's a series of books that encapsulates an interesting array of detail-oriented action and thought-provoking situations that leave the reader wanting more. We're here today to explore some interesting elements in this extensive series. Because of the depth and length of the tale, we would like to start off by exploring the importance of Robert Jordan's inspiration and his Wheel of Time series. And then we will address the idea of time as a wheel and the connection to our modern time. Stubble, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about the Wheel of Time.
Yeah, thanks. It will be interesting. See what this will lead to.
Well, we've been talking about this, or you've been talking about this on the air for so long. And, I have to say that you have single-handedly brought me into becoming interested in the series of A Wheel of Time. And, I have to give you credit for that because, while I have other resources available to me, having another person that I know who loves the series, is well-versed in the series and sees its value, and then goes ahead and imparts that onto, other people, it's really appreciated.
Yeah. It's been a long. I started to talk about it on different channels when the TV series was announced, and it's been a pandemic and everything, so it got delayed 1 year, and so it feels like I've been talking about it forever now. But you want to share your passion and so on.
Yes, and that's very important. And the fact of the matter is that like something like the Wheel of Time, which is kind of like an epic series, at least that's how I view it, epic series of books. There's a lot of work out there, and who better than a friend to recommend a particular IP, and this one, it's really fantastic. So I'm excited for this. So I did want to ask you, can you tell me how you found Robert Jordan's series and when you started reading or trying to find out about the Wheel of Time?
Well, when I was in the equivalent of our high school, we got I live in Sweden, and we got, during English class, we got an assignment to pick an English book to read and do a book report on, and we had a substantial amount of time on it. And I went to the local library together with others to find a book, and the others picked up books that had been made into movies, or the slimmest volumes you could find of something, to do as little as possible. And I was an avid book reader, and I loved fantasy and science fiction, so I thought this was a great thing. I loved it. So I went to the English section, and I found this blue thick fantasy book, and I read it in a few days, and saw that, there's a second book, because I wanted to know the ending before I wrote the book report. So I got the second book as well and read that in a week or something like that. And there was a third book, and I read the third book, and then there wasn't any internet back then, at least any practical internet. So, and this was in '94, I think. So I tried to find out how many books there were, and there were 6 books published at the time, and it was still not finished. So I can't do a book report on this. So I picked another book to do a book report on, but I read the rest of the rest of the 6 books, and then I reread them a couple of times. And then the 7th books came along, and then I reread the series, and then the 8th books, and then I reread the 7th before, and so on. So every book release, I reread the series. So yeah, that's and I prefer my if the original author is if it's written in English, I prefer to read it in English, because I've found that sometimes the translation is a filter. You lose some of the tone, you lose some. Sometimes the translation isn't perfect, so I prefer to read books in English if they're written in English. So, but that was my start of the whole thing. It was a school report, or a book report in school, so to say. And yeah, that's what started the whole thing.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I do remember that time period in the 90s, and how if you wanted a book, you either went to the library, if you had one near you, or a bookstore. So you had to seek out a hard copy book. And it was a prized and cherished possession, especially if it's a book that like the Wheel of Time, or something on that order. So and the bookstores at that time, it was a big deal. You would walk in, and they would have and the libraries as well. You would walk in, and they would have books sort of on display often, where they would say, oh, this is the science fiction fantasy section. And they would have, at least where I lived, like a kiosk in the library or in the bookstore with the book displayed. And if there were additional editions, or let's say if it was book number 4 that came out, they would have 1 through 3 there as well. And they would say, this is the latest book from whichever author. And it was an exciting thing to kind of go to the bookstore and look and see what was new that was coming out. And so the book was made in the 90s, as you said, and as I just mentioned, I remember at that time I was quite a prolific reader, and it was actually a very prolific period for fantasy novels. I remember like other series like Dragonlance and Darksword and Rose of the Prophet books. But after I started to read or listen to, as I said, I listened to the audiobook for The Wheel of Time, in particular for the first book, The Eye of the World, I noticed that The Wheel of Time stands out quite a bit when it comes to depth and realism. And so I'm kind of curious, how and why do you think Jordan chose this approach to his novels when so many others were going in a different direction, perhaps not as much depth, not as much realism in their books, but he chose to go to a higher level with his? What do you think his motivation was behind that?
I don't know if it was a motivation, so to speak. I think it's just how he writes. I think it's better at characterization of making it more personal to each character, the events that happen. It's not as plot focused as some of the other books, more character focused and character driven. The characters are not just characters; they feel like real people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And sometimes they're not doing something plot wise. They just exist. They just are, and in their everyday life. So if you remember in chapter 5 of The Eye of the World, the first book, there's a section where Rand just chops wood.
Yes.
And do other chores, and there's nothing plot-wise that happens, but it's one of the most enjoyable things to read, because we get a sense of the character. We see what type of character it is, and you don't find those things in the other books. You don't see them as real people. You see them as characters that fulfills a plot. Whereas here it's real people doing normal things, and then things happen and they react, and so they feel like real characters in a different way. And you haven't read this yet, but in a later book, there's another the character Perrin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they travel, high adventure, excitement. They go from place to place, and then they stop in a town, and he just sees a smithy there. He's a blacksmith apprentice, and he just goes down, asks if he can work on something, and it's one of the favorite chapters in the fandom. He just makes because Jordan really goes into detail, and you see how he just makes a simple thing for I think it's a scraper for a barrel or something, and you see every step of the way, and it's very enjoyable to read, and you get his character, and nothing plot-wise happens. It just you enjoy the character, and so I don't know. It's like it's very character-driven, and it's not as plot-driven as most of the others, and everything's very personal to them. Yeah, so that's my answer.
Yeah, I definitely think you make a lot of good points with that, and it's like having a page out of the life of the character, and so you understand, what they might be doing in their normal day-to-day life, and you can understand, what position they're coming from and what their point of view might be going forward. For example, like what particular things are important to them, and what types of plans or what they might have thought their life is going to be like living in their village or wherever they are. And also, like you can get a sense of that historical context that Jordan creates for each character is very fulfilling, because you feel like you're literally sitting there with this character, and it doesn't have to have an agenda attached to it. It's just, this is what this character is like. And here we're experiencing what they would be experiencing in the course of their day. So, I think it is actually very useful to have that, because it does add to the enrichment of the story and of course of the character building. So, it's wonderful that Jordan has chosen to do that, and oftentimes more than once. So I've been enjoying it as well in the book so far. I've also noticed the focus that Jordan has chosen to take when he was writing his series on different cultures and beliefs. And can you talk about or tell us about the use of European as well as Asian mythology in the series? And what do you think Jordan was trying to accomplish by incorporating views from around the world?
Yeah. One of the inspirations for Jordan to write the whole thing was the similarities between myths in different cultures, and he thought that some of these old myths was just not like the Norse gods and so on. They were not just made up things; they were based on people, but not depicted as they really were. The myths are. He reverse engineered the myths. Like if you have a long way of the game telephone, you tell one story to the next person, to the next person, next person, and in the end it's garbled from the original message. And that was one thing of his that our myths are based on events that happens in the books, and since time is circular, the myths, ancient myths in the books, are based on our current events to some degree. But there are a lot of myths. It's just not European and Asian. There's also Middle Eastern. There's Aboriginal myths, Australian Aboriginal, and a lot of Arthurian legends. That's reverse engineered in the way I mentioned. And I don't know if you noticed in I think it's chapter 4 when they meet the Gleeman for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And he tells stories from old times.
Yes.
Did you notice Len, who flew to the moon in the belly of an eagle?
I didn't notice, but I did notice that he had quite a list of
Yeah,
stories that he was going to tell. It wasn't one or two. It
yeah,
felt like 20. It was
yeah.
quite a few, and he clearly had all of this knowledge that I think just from, let's say being a well-read person, that some of his knowledge may come or be useful in the future. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But no, I'm going to go back to chapter 4 and re-listen to that and see, because he lists quite a few stories that he's able to tell or plan on telling.
Yeah.
So I didn't notice that one, but he had quite a lot, and that's very interesting. Elaborate a little bit more on that particular.
I can mention a few here.
Yes.
So Len, who flew to the moon in a bill of an eagle, is John Glenn,
Right.
but they mixed up that with with Neil Armstrong. The eagle has landed on the moon. That thing. So it's about the moon landing.
Yes.
Yeah, and then you have something like Anla, the wise counselor. That's actually Ann Landers, the columnist.
Yes.
Has been is a wise counselor now in an ancient myth. And then there's the giants Mork and Merk that fights with the lances of fire that reach around the world. That's America and Moscow, the Cold War.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Then you had Elspeth, Queen of all. That's Queen
Yes,
Elizabeth of United Kingdom.
I
And,
see.
and there's another list of, so I think Mother Teresa is mentioned there as well, and a lot of other things. But so there you have the other things that you have our current events that have become myths in the stories.
It's incredibly clever, and I didn't pick up on that. Had you not mentioned it, I wouldn't have known that that's what the intentions were for that part. And I'm going to have to go back and bring my mother into this, who's also listening to the audiobook, and see what she can pick up on and identify. And it's an incredibly clever way to incorporate, as you mentioned, some very important cultural events in our lifetime and in other times. And I think that, honestly, I think the cleverness of doing something like that is enjoyable to figure out. And I guess it shouldn't be a surprise to me, because you did mention that they had a contest for the Wheel of Time where everybody had to put together a puzzle.
Yeah.
And that cleverness, finding the hidden meaning in things, or putting in very important events or individuals into a myth in a story that is really epic, is incredible, and very, very entertaining and interesting to listen to. So I'm gonna go back to chapter 4 and listen for that. And I kind of wondered whether Jordan was doing or incorporating these different cultural beliefs or cultural events to show that we're all just on the same planet, and the importance of being a brother and a sister to one another, even though we're from different countries and may have different faiths and different beliefs. The idea that by creating or saying, the influence of cultures all over the world are equally important, is just another way to kind of bring us all together and make us realize how much value there is in looking at all the differences and celebrating a lot of the interesting nuances of all of them. So, I think that he is probably someone who was just having a very dynamic point of view of what the world means. Perhaps a person like that wouldn't see us in separate nations. Perhaps we would see, we all have our parts of the world, but together it belongs to all of us.
Yeah.
So I think that that's just kind of an interesting thing. And I'm suspecting, Stubble, that there's even more things like that in the Wheel of Time that it's going to take me some re-examining to figure out everything, isn't it?
Well, it takes several rereads to pick out all these things, and that's one of the joys of doing a reread, because you see both all the foreshadowing. You have foreshadowing in book 1 that plays out in book 13 and 14, and there's these things, these hidden things that you don't really need for the story. They're just fun stuff. They're Easter eggs.
They are Easter eggs, and it's very much like real life, isn't it? You kind of come across coincidences every once in a while, and those coincidences perhaps won't have a major effect over your life, but you might say, hey, that's kind of funny. I found a pattern there, and that's very interesting. I wonder why that was like that. And oftentimes, I always say there's no such thing as coincidence. It was just something that's meant to be, kind of like how the wheel weaves in the Wheel of Time. You don't question it. You just accept it and say, yes, okay, I recognize that. And that also kind of feels like it's a reiteration of, how our lives actually are, for me anyway. But so it's very exciting, seeing a book like this, and just knowing that I have plenty more to explore in it, and more than once, which is even better. So, I want to continue on and look at, fantasy books, which sometimes incorporate magic. Not all of them do, but sometimes they do. And that magic can influence the outcome of the story. What are some of the common magical characters we see in many other books? And why do you think Jordan chose to use a different approach when it comes to, let's say, maybe not gender roles, but just roles in general? And the way, for example, I noticed that in this particular story, and I don't know whether it's true or not, but the Shaddai character, am I saying that correctly?
Aes Sedai.
The Aes Sedai character, they can recruit individuals. Is that correct?
Recruit. They find people who have the ability to learn, to channel the power to be magicians, and then they encourage them to train with them. And all of them don't make it because it's a very difficult thing to learn. And some have more ability than others, and so on. So I don't say that they recruit people, but they encourage people to who has the ability to learn, and some that they call wilders, they start to channel whether they are taught or not. They just start, and many of them die because you need training to master this thing. And he didn't use the old wizard trope that was so common in those days when this was written. He used normal people. There are people of nobility, there are people of humble upbringing, there are every type of people who have the ability to learn, and they can join the Aes Sedai and develop the powers and join the organization and so on. And it's a female organization at this time that it plays out. Earlier, they named the Age of Legends is something that comes up all the time. Events in Age of Legends directly affect things in the time of the story. And back then there were male Aes Sedai as well, but the source of their power was tainted when they sealed away the dark evil presence. And so in this world there are female organizations, there are female channelers, and the male channels go mad after a while, and they have to be they gentle them, they cut them off from the power. And something that's different from many of the other books and stories that were written when this was written is that it's a very personal thing. You haven't gotten to book 2 yet, so you haven't
No.
really gotten into this. But it's a physical thing. It's like a drug. They want more because they experience the world so much clearer. They think everything is so much better. They can see better. They can smell better. When they have the power inside, and they just want to draw more and more and more. So it's like a drug, but if they draw too much, they may kill themselves or burn themselves out. That is, they sever the ability channel if they draw too much. So it's a very dangerous thing as well if you don't have the training. So it's not like an old wizard who reads some words and waves some wand or something, and then magic happens. It's a very physical thing. It's a very it's a very different thing. Now there's stories that's written that have these elements, but Jordan was one of the first that really incorporated the personal feeling, the personal experience of using magic, and it becomes also a story device in many ways. I don't want to spoil things for you going forward, but one of the central conflicts is also that men are feared and despised, or those who can channel are feared and despised because of 3,000 years of people going mad and blowing up stuff. So when a spoiler for those who haven't read, when when a central character becomes the dragon, the messianic character, if you exchange the word dragon for messiah, you get a much better sense of what type of character it is. When he arrives on the scene, they can't gentle him. They can't take away his power, because he needs to be able to use it when he's going to face off against the bad guys at the end. So how does a world cope with something that they fear and to some ways despise, but must interact with? And it's a very interesting way of establishing conflict in the world, because he must become both a political figure and a powerful figure in his personal way with the power and so on. So you have much interesting things to read or listen to ahead of you when it comes to that.
Well, clearly, Jordan's work influenced, as you said, many stories going forward from that time period. And, I think that readers also wanted to make a stronger connection to characters. And the best way to do that is to get into more detail. And, having just covered, the eye of the world, and loving every minute of that first novel, I want to talk about the importance of world building and how Jordan makes a point to ease you into the world. So it seems, almost to a point where, and we did mention that it kind of does require that you read it in, over again to really get a full understanding of the material. But why do you suppose more creators aren't focusing on this type of world building where he has such an extensive amount of information and background so that you do understand where you are in his series?
Yeah, I mean, many of us are doing world building, and it's just what type of world building they have. If you look at Dune, for example, they have a very, what you call a steep learning curve. You get thrown a lot of information at once that you have to take in and try to find out how does this fit into this thing, how does the character fit into the world, what's going on, and then you have like a normal mystery book set in New York, for example. Well, there's some world building there as well. You have to establish perhaps the quarter, the block where things are happening, maybe the police station. There's a little bit of world building there as well. Jordan has a very long series, so he's he has a very much world building, but it's not as steep. You don't have to learn everything at once, and it trickles on little by little, and at the end, it's a massive world that's very exciting to read about. And you also see, because he worked as a nuclear engineer for the Navy, so he has a scientific background, and you see that shine through. There's science fiction elements from when they're talking about the Age of Legends, that happens thousands of years earlier. They're talking about a civilization that was what we would call a science fiction world. Because they combined, they had the one power, the magic, and they combined that and built a society that we would call a science fiction world, because they had flying vehicles, they had all kinds of stuff. And then, you know, you read the prologue in Dire the World.
Yes.
And that's where we see the breaking of the world start. He realizes that he has he's mad. He's killed his family, his friends, and everything.
Right.
And he realizes what he has done, and he commits suicide by blowing himself up and creating a mountain, more or less. But there's thousands of other male channelers around the world that's in the same situation that he is. And they're also going mad and doing all kinds of stuff. And they have objects of power that makes them stronger. Something called Angriel. I think Angriel are mentioned in the first book. It makes you able to draw more the power and use more the power. So many channels had that, and they wrecked the world. Mountains rose, oceans flowed in, and so on. And I don't remember what you asked me right now.
Well, what you're touching on is exactly what I'm referring to, and the idea that you know, he has chosen to focus on, and of course character development is the most important thing here, but he also has created a world that we can understand.
Yeah.
And it's an incredible focus on it, rather than saying the village had, you know, this, that, or the other, and then that's all you find out about that village. He continues on. He gives you, you know, if perhaps not through the writing itself, but through a narrator in the story, to understand what might have come to pass before. And in this particular case with the prologue, we found out that, you know, something was very bad happened. Yeah. And the idea that, you know, that character kind of set himself on fire, or, you know, kind of destroyed himself, you know, using his abilities, you know, I think shows that there was some sort of challenge, or the responsibility of using magical powers isn't all hearts and flowers.
No.
And so, you know, there is a certain level of respect that you have to have when you're wielding this power. And even when the Shaddai said, when she says, I think is it Miriam? Moraine says that you know, when she talks about this this fight that occurred and how the whole landscape changed. You know, she's kind of trying to explain to everyone, you know, when you possess knowledge that spans, you know, we're very lucky to be living at this time, because the average person possesses knowledge that spans generations, even millennia, which might not have been something to a fact before. And for Jordan to kind of demonstrate that in his book could also demonstrate the reality for so many people today. but they need to know the information. And you as the reader need to know this information to understand where perhaps her point of view is from. She's not just thinking about tomorrow. She's thinking about, maybe 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now. And, when you're looking at things from that point of view, you have a different perspective on things. And now all of a sudden you've created a world where there are individuals who have this ability and the knowledge. But like I said, we're very lucky at a time today in 2021 to have the knowledge of or a small amount of history of our world for a few thousand years, let's say maybe up to 5,000 years ago. Many of us are kind of somewhat aware of what might have happened from then to now. Maybe we're not experts, but it is quite a bit of knowledge to have. And along with it comes this responsibility that she has, and she's trying to bring them up to speed because she realizes that in order for them to survive in the world now under this threat, they have to have that knowledge. And what happens when you bring a character up to speed or characters up to speed with, what has actually happened in the past and where you stand as a person in the role of history. And it's very interesting to kind of look at this because it's a very nice way of world building, because you can't assume that everybody's going to know everything. And I think that it's the same today. You can encounter people from all over the world. You're in Sweden, I'm in New York. And, we might pick up another person who might be completely unaware of histories of different places. And I think what it also shows is that there has to be some sort of transfer of information from sort of like a mentor or from, a person who has that to others, so that we can make these decisions, whether we're wielding magic or not. And I think that that's a very important idea of world building in his stories, but also a very important role, even in modern times. So, I kind of think that rather than just give you the whole history in the beginning, for her to go ahead and say, well, I have to tell you about this, very important event that happened. And, later on in the book, choosing particular moments when she has their attention, or they, perhaps they don't have a choice but to listen to her, or they're ready for the information. Because sometimes in a book, you may not be ready for all of that. You may not be ready to absorb everything right away. And so you may need a few chapters of, understanding that there's a journey and there's no turning back on this journey. You're not going to return home tomorrow. It's not going to, we're not going to turn the car around and go back. And so, that pleasure of having that experience for them is also a pleasure for us. And, that's a very successful way to do world building, because it's relatable and you also do remember it. Now, it's true, I didn't remember everything from chapter 4 where the Merryman was telling them, but he had quite a few stories. It was a lot. And I wondered to myself why he chose to say so many stories at that moment. But once again, I'm ready to go back to that point and go back and, and listen to that over again and figure out with my mom what the stories mean. But I think that his focus on world building really allows you to understand, their place in this timeline and in the wheel, so to speak.
And I
Mhm.
also wanted to mention that Tolkien, he was fascinated by languages, an expert in languages and
Yes.
history, and he based his world on different languages and all that. Jordan was much more into history as well, but sociology and cultural anthropology and military history, and he read a lot of books and was very well read in this subject. He said that he read between 200 and 400 books per year.
Wow.
I mean, most of them were pretty thin books, I suppose, but they were very specialized in very specialized areas, and most of them were non-fiction. So he had a wealth of knowledge from all over the world, of different cultures, of different religion myths, of military history, and he put them all in a blender, shook it, and the world emerge, so to speak. So it's a very detailed world, and you will learn more about it as you go along.
I certainly will. And just to close on our discussion, as if we haven't already mentioned it, The Wheel of Time is being made into a live action series. And so this is incredibly exciting. And for some people who may be watching this, these trailers that they've been coming out with look amazing. And I'm very excited about it. And perhaps one thing that's very interesting is that I did view the trailer before I finished the book, The Eye of the World. So looking at the trailer, I must confess, it did look very interesting, but it became more interesting to me after I read Eye of the World. So it actually felt like more was at stake after I read the first book. So I think it's going to be a very interesting adaptation of the book. But I did want to ask you, Stubble, about this, because while I'm excited for it, for the first time in a long time, I feel like it might not be possible to create a show for the series, only because, like, in the sense of this magnitude of what you're going to do as a production company. It reminds me of how they try to adapt Dune into like a series or a movie. I just wanted to get your thoughts on trying to adapt Wheel of Time into live action.
Well, I see the books and the TV series as two very different things, and I've seen it like that from the start. Everyone knows the Lord of the Rings movies and the books, and the movies are quite different from the books. There's, Aragorn's character arc. He doesn't have a character arc in the books, more or less. He's the same. He gets a title, but he's the same person from when they meet him to when they end. In the movie, he has a character arc. He's very hesitant about becoming a king, and then he accepts his responsibility. So he's quite a different character. Like Galadriel is a little bit different from the books to the movies, and Faramir is also. So you will see some differences. And in Lord of the Rings, you have left out scoring of the Shire at the end. You have left out Tom Bombadil and the Old Forest, and you have left out a lot of things, and you have added stuff as well. So they have to adapt it, and as I don't remember the name now, but someone said that an adaptation is a reinvention for a new medium, and you will have the same story, you will have the same characters, but they have to adjust things, and they have to take out some subplots that's not as important. They will have to introduce some things that needs for the new medium. So I see it as two very different things. Going back to Lord of the Rings, reading the books, I can sit in front of a fireplace, drink a nice cup of tea, relax, have a good time, really go into the world. When I watch the movies, it's not the same feeling. It's a very more energetic feeling. You get the story much faster. You don't have the same. You have the same story, more or less, but they are not the same thing. And I see the TV series and the books in the same way. It will be the same story, but they will be told slightly different, because you have so much internal dialogue in the books that you can't have in a TV series. You have to show character through action instead of through thoughts. And that means that you have to adjust things, you have to change things, you have to do an adaptation. And so, which means you have to cut some things, because there are some storylines that are not that important for the end result. And you can't have 20 seasons of a TV series. And, like the scene I mentioned earlier in the books where Rand chops wood for a third of a chapter or something, or at least a few paragraphs. You can't have that in a TV series. Not in the same way. you have to show his character in another way. So they will be two different things, but it will be the same story with some adjustments here and there. So that's how I look at it. Yeah. I don't know if that was comprehensible, but yeah, that's my answer to that.
Well, it's a very good answer, and you make a lot of very good points to that. And of course, there are going to be things that you're going to be looking for in the adaptation, and then things that I guess you'll say, "Oh, they left this out," and I didn't see this element, or they've changed certain things as well. But looking at that trailer now, I'm very excited for this series. And however, our series here is going to focus right now on the series Wheel of Time books. And this was the first video, part 1, on the special series Wheel of Time. And what I'd like to do going forward is to continue the series. So, Stubble, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about this introduction to the Wheel of Time. And for anyone who's watching this, please come back and check out part 2 as we continue our Wheel of Time series with Stubble McShave. And thank you so much, Stubble, for joining me today. And everybody, remember, be kind. Take care.